Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Young and the Restless channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The walls of the Abbott mansion had never felt colder to Diane Jenkins Abbott, and as the weight of silence settled around her, she finally found the courage to reach out to the man she feared she might already be losing. Alone in her suite, Diane stared at her phone with trembling uncertainty before leaving Jack Abbott a heartfelt voicemail, her voice carefully steady even as emotion threatened to break through. She told him she wanted to stop by the house, to finally sit down and talk things out, to stop running from the painful distance that had grown between them. For the first time in what felt like forever, Diane seemed ready to confront the damage head-on and fight for whatever remained of their marriage. But the moment hope began to flicker inside her, darkness crept in with terrifying force. Exhaustion and fear consumed her, and before long, Diane drifted into a nightmare so vivid and cruel that it felt painfully real. In that dream, the life she desperately wanted to save had already slipped through her fingers. Inside the nightmare, the Abbott mansion no longer felt like Diane's home at all. The warm halls that once symbolized stability and love had transformed into a place where she no longer belonged, and standing at the center of it all was Patty Williams. Diane watched in horror as Patty moved comfortably through the mansion beside Jack, laughing with him as though she had seamlessly taken Diane's place in his life. The shock only deepened when Patty revealed something even more impossible and devastating. Somehow, she had never miscarried after all. With chilling satisfaction, Patty gloated that Jack's long-lost daughter had survived, turning what should have been a joyful revelation into a weapon aimed directly at Diane's heart. Every word Patty spoke felt calculated to humiliate her, as she proudly played up the idea of their perfect family reunion unfolding without Diane anywhere in the picture. Then came the final blow. The moment that shattered Diane completely, when Patty smugly informed her that she could meet their daughter before being thrown out of the mansion for good. Diane's heartbreak reached its peak as Jack looked at her with cold finality and quietly told her goodbye. A farewell that echoed through the dream like the end of everything she loved. She jolted awake in terror, gasping for breath as reality slowly returned, though the emotional damage lingered long after the nightmare faded. Meanwhile, across Genoa City at Society's bar, Jack Abbott found himself face-to-face with the very woman haunting Diane's dreams. Patty sat beside him with an unsettling calmness, and the conversation quickly turned toward the disastrous night aboard Victor Newman's yacht. Jack pressed Patty for the truth, determined to understand exactly how much Victor had manipulated the situation. Patty eventually admitted that Victor had indeed paid her to spend time with Jack that night, though with her usual twisted honesty, she confessed she would have done it for free anyway. The admission carried an eerie mixture of obsession and sincerity, making the entire encounter feel even more disturbing. Patty also acknowledged that while she personally had not drugged Jack, she believed it was entirely possible Victor had arranged for the whiskey to be spiked behind the scenes. Yet despite everything, Patty seemed almost romantic about the chaos they created together, insisting she preferred believing it was their chemistry that truly drove them into each other's arms. Jack, however, had no interest in reliving the scandal or entertaining Patty's fantasies. He wanted revenge. The pain of potentially losing Diane had hardened something inside Jack, and now all of that anger was aimed squarely at Victor Newman. Sitting across from Patty, Jack revealed a shocking plan that carried the unmistakable scent of desperation and vengeance. If Victor's interference had destroyed his marriage, then Jack intended to return the favor by making sure Victor lost Nikki Newman forever. The idea hung heavily between them, dangerous and deeply personal, as Patty studied Jack with fascination. She wanted to know what she stood to gain from helping him destroy Victor's world, and for a moment, Jack carefully measured his response. Eventually, he admitted that if Patty helped him carry out this plan, it could go a long way toward changing how he saw her. That single statement was enough to light something hopeful and unstable inside Patty's eyes. Suddenly, what had started as a bitter conversation about betrayal began evolving into a risky alliance built on revenge, loneliness, and dangerous emotional hunger. And in Genoa City, alliances formed in pain rarely stay under control for long. Elsewhere, another complicated game was unfolding as Phyllis Summers quietly maneuvered herself into a position of power. At the Grand Phoenix Athletic Club, Phyllis arranged a suite for Matt Clark under her own name, carefully settling him into the room while keeping a close eye on him. Matt, clearly restless despite his fragile condition, suggested maybe he should wander around town and try to regain some sense of normalcy. But Phyllis immediately shut the idea down, warning him that the Newmans were actively searching for him and that stepping outside would be incredibly dangerous. Matt floated the possibility of trying to make amends with them, hoping perhaps there was still a path toward peace. But Phyllis dismissed that idea just as quickly. She painted the Newmans as a ruthless and powerful family, insisting they were not good people and could never be trusted. Her words carried the sharp edge of personal history, revealing years of resentment and bitterness toward the Newman dynasty. Eventually, she convinced Matt to stay inside the suite and rest, promising they could have breakfast together in the morning before she slipped away downstairs. But once Matt was left alone, silence became its own kind of torment. He sat with the growing pressure in his head, struggling to piece together fragments of memory that refused to fully connect. Then suddenly, flashes of the past came rushing back in violent bursts. Matt remembered a fierce confrontation, one filled with rage and physical aggression where Nick Newman had attacked him. The fragmented memory hit with enough force to leave him shaken and deeply confused. He could still see the fury in Nick's eyes, could still feel the chaos of that moment, yet so much remained missing from his mind. Matt found himself spiraling with unanswered questions, wondering who that man truly was, and why his own memories felt trapped behind a wall he couldn't break through. The uncertainty left him more disturbed than ever, turning his already fragile mental state into something even more dangerous. Downstairs at the club, Phyllis moved through the lobby with the confidence of someone who believed she finally held the upper hand. That confidence only grew when she crossed paths with Michael Baldwin and casually admitted she was prepared to strike a deal with Victor Newman. The moment Michael learned that Phyllis had Matt hidden away, realization immediately spread across his face. For the first time, this chaotic situation suddenly seemed like it might actually produce results. Michael quickly decided he needed to be directly involved, insisting that when the time came to negotiate with Victor, he would handle the talking himself. Phyllis clearly enjoyed the leverage she now possessed, savoring the thought of forcing Victor into a corner for once. Together, they prepared to head toward the Newman Ranch, knowing the conversation ahead could shift the balance of power in Genoa City. But even they understood that dealing with Victor Newman was never simple, especially when desperation and family loyalty were involved. At the Newman Ranch, tension was already boiling over long before Phyllis and Michael arrived. Victor confronted Nick Newman about his reckless desire to wipe Matt off the map permanently, and the fierce exchange between father and son revealed just how emotionally shattered Nick had become. Victor firmly forbade Nick from taking matters into his own hands, especially given Nick's ongoing struggles with drugs and emotional instability. But Nick's frustration finally exploded under the crushing weight of guilt, helplessness, and self-loathing that had been building inside him for far too long. He broke down emotionally, admitting how deeply he felt he had let everyone around him down. The pain in Nick's voice was impossible to ignore as years of pressure and disappointment came spilling out in front of his father. And for once, Victor set aside his intimidating persona and simply embraced his son, pulling Nick into a comforting hug that revealed the rare vulnerable side of the Newman patriarch. It was a brief but deeply emotional moment, one where power and pride faded away, leaving only a father trying to hold together a broken son. That fragile moment of vulnerability was interrupted the instant Phyllis and Michael arrived at the ranch, bringing with them a storm Victor immediately recognized. Michael wasted no time cutting straight to the point, calmly asking Victor what Matt Clark might be worth to him. Beside him, Phyllis couldn't hide her smug satisfaction as she gloated about having Matt safely on ice, fully aware that she now possessed something Victor desperately needed. The atmosphere inside the ranch grew heavier with every passing second as the negotiation began taking shape. Phyllis laid out her demands clearly, expecting Victor to use his influence to convince Christine Blair Romolotti to drop the charges against her in exchange for Matt. But Victor Newman was never a man who settled for simple trades. Without hesitation, he pushed back harder, insisting he also wanted Newman Enterprises returned as part of the deal. His cold ultimatum, take it or leave it, landed like a thunderclap inside the room, instantly turning the negotiation into an all-out power struggle. As alliances shifted and emotions spiraled across Genoa City, it became painfully clear that the Matt Clark drama was nowhere near finished. Diane remained haunted by fears of losing Jack forever, while Jack himself drifted dangerously closer to revenge alongside the unpredictable Patty Williams. Phyllis believed she had finally cornered Victor Newman, yet Victor's relentless hunger for control made him more dangerous than ever. Nick continued battling inner demons that threatened to consume him completely, and Matt remained trapped between fractured memories and forces far bigger than himself. Every conversation carried hidden motives, every alliance seemed one betrayal away from collapse, and every emotional wound only pushed these characters deeper into chaos. In true Genoa City fashion, love, revenge, fear, and power were colliding all at once, setting the stage for even more explosive confrontations still to come. Morning light slowly crept across Genoa City, but there was nothing peaceful about the tension hanging over the town. The night's emotional collisions had left cracks in nearly every relationship, and as the city awakened, those fractures only deepened. Diane Jenkins Abbott sat alone in silence, still rattled by the horrifying nightmare that refused to release its grip on her mind. Even though she now understood it had only been a dream, the fear felt painfully real because deep down, Diane knew how fragile her marriage to Jack had become. Every image of Patty Williams standing comfortably inside the Abbott mansion replayed in her thoughts like a warning she couldn't escape. The idea that Jack might truly move on without her tore through Diane's heart with unbearable force, especially after everything they had already survived together. And perhaps what frightened her most was the realization that Victor Newman's interference had succeeded in planting doubt and insecurity exactly where he wanted it. At the same time, Jack Abbott found himself standing dangerously close to becoming someone he never intended to be. The betrayal he felt after the yacht scandal had ignited something dark inside him, something fueled less by logic and more by wounded pride and heartbreak. Sitting with Patty Williams at society had forced Jack into emotionally dangerous territory because no matter how much he tried to treat their interaction like a strategic alliance, Patty clearly viewed it as something far more personal. There was excitement in her eyes when Jack suggested helping her could change the way he saw her, and that dangerous spark only intensified as she imagined herself becoming important in his life again. For Patty, even the smallest sign of emotional validation from Jack felt like destiny unfolding in front of her. But Jack's focus remained fixed on Victor Newman, the man he blamed for dismantling the life he had worked so hard to rebuild. In Jack's mind, revenge had become less about justice and more about making Victor experience the same devastating pain he now carried himself. And the deeper he sank into that obsession, the more blurred the line between victim and aggressor became. Back at the GCAC suite, Matt Clark remained trapped in a haze of confusion and fear as fragments of memory continued surfacing without warning. The flashes involving Nick Newman had unsettled him deeply because although the details remained incomplete, the emotional intensity of the confrontation was impossible to ignore. Matt could still remember the rage in Nick's face, the desperation behind his attack, and the terrifying feeling that whatever had happened between them carried consequences far greater than he understood. The problem was that every recovered memory seemed to raise even more questions instead of providing answers. He paced the room restlessly, trying to force his mind into clarity, but the harder he pushed, the more disoriented he became. His head injury had transformed his own identity into something unstable, leaving him unsure of who he could trust, including himself. Meanwhile, outside the safety of the suite, powerful people were already negotiating his future as though he were nothing more than a bargaining chip in a larger war. Phyllis Summers, however, thrived in that kind of chaos. As she rode with Michael Baldwin toward the Newman Ranch, there was an unmistakable confidence radiating from her. For once, Phyllis believed she held leverage strong enough to corner Victor Newman, and that thought alone brought her a dangerous sense of satisfaction. Years of conflict with the Newman family had left scars that never truly healed, and now she finally had something Victor desperately wanted. Michael, ever the strategist, remained cautious despite Phyllis's growing excitement. He understood better than anyone that Victor rarely walked into negotiations without hidden plans already in motion. Even so, Michael could not deny the opportunity sitting in front of them. If Victor agreed to force Christine Blair Romalotti into dropping the charges against Phyllis, it could completely change the direction of multiple lives at once. But the moment Victor demanded Newman Enterprises in return, Michael immediately recognized the dangerous imbalance in the negotiation. Victor was not simply trying to retrieve Matt, he was attempting to reclaim total control. Inside the Newman Ranch, the atmosphere turned colder with every passing second after Victor delivered his ultimatum. Phyllis's smug confidence faltered slightly as she realized Victor had no intention of playing defense. He leaned into his power with ruthless precision, making it clear that if Phyllis wanted protection and freedom, the price would be enormous. Yet even as the negotiation intensified, Victor's attention repeatedly drifted toward Nick. The emotional breakdown Nick had suffered moments earlier still lingered heavily in Victor's mind, and beneath all his intimidation and manipulation, there was genuine concern for his son's fragile condition. Nick himself looked emotionally exhausted, carrying the weight of addiction struggles, guilt and failure like chains around his shoulders. Watching Phyllis and Victor battle over Matt only deepened Nick's frustration because somewhere beneath all the chaos, he knew this situation had already spiraled far beyond control. Every decision being made seemed driven by revenge, leverage, or desperation instead of compassion or truth. And in that room filled with power players fighting for dominance, Nick appeared to be the only one emotionally collapsing under the cost of it all. As tensions rose at the ranch, Diane finally gathered the courage to act on the voicemail she had left for Jack earlier. The nightmare still haunted her, her, but it also forced her to confront an uncomfortable truth. If she continued allowing fear and silence to control her, she could lose Jack for real. She refused to let Patty Williams become more than a passing threat, and she refused to surrender her marriage without a fight. But as Diane prepared herself emotionally for what could be a painful conversation, she had no idea just how close Jack had already grown to Patty through their shared hatred of Victor. The possibility of revenge was creating a toxic bond between them, one capable of pulling Jack further away from the life he once wanted with Diane. And in Genoa City, emotional vulnerability has a way of opening doors to devastating mistakes. Elsewhere, Patty Williams remained lost inside fantasies that blurred reality and obsession together. Jack's willingness to work with her had reignited emotions she never truly let go of, and now she began imagining herself stepping back into a meaningful place in his life. In her mind, Victor Newman's manipulation had not destroyed something between her and Jack. It had reopened a door fate intended them to walk through together. Patty replayed Jack's words repeatedly, clinging to the idea that helping him could change how he viewed her forever. But beneath Patty's excitement was something deeply unstable, because her emotions had never existed in moderation. What Jack considered a temporary alliance, Patty was already transforming into emotional destiny. And if Jack failed to recognize the dangerous emotional storm building around her, he could soon find himself trapped in consequences far worse than he imagined. Meanwhile, Matt Clark's confusion continued intensifying inside the quiet walls of the GCAC suite. The isolation that Phyllis insisted would protect him was now beginning to feel like a prison. Every recovered memory chipped away at his fragile sense of stability, and the image of Nick Newman attacking him kept replaying with growing clarity. Matt desperately wanted answers about what had happened, but even more terrifying was the possibility that the truth might reveal he had done something unforgivable himself. The uncertainty hollowed him out from the inside. He no longer knew whether he was a victim, a threat, or simply another broken soul caught in Genoa City's endless cycle of manipulation and betrayal. And as powerful figures continued negotiating his fate behind closed doors, Matt sat alone with the horrifying realization that his own memories might become the key to destroying several lives at once. By the end of the day, the emotional pressure across Genoa City had only intensified. Revenge plots were growing more dangerous, alliances were becoming increasingly unstable, and buried emotions were beginning to erupt in ways nobody could fully control. Diane feared losing her future. Jack risked losing himself to vengeance. Phyllis gambled with dangerous leverage, and Victor continued tightening his grip on everyone around him. Nick struggled to keep himself from unraveling completely, while Matt stood at the center of a storm he barely understood. And looming over all of it was the haunting sense that one wrong move could trigger consequences none of them would survive unchanged. In Genoa City, the truth never stays buried forever, and when it finally rises to the surface, it rarely destroys just one life.